Lena sat in the cozy living room of their apartment, the warm glow of the lamp casting soft shadows around her. The city outside hummed with life, but inside their little sanctuary, it felt like time had slowed down. She was typing away on her laptop, her mind focused on work, while Ethan sat across from her, absorbed in a book. Lena glanced over at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It was a familiar sight, Ethan, the quiet one, finding peace in his own world. But tonight, there was a slight unease in her heart. "Hey, you want to watch something tonight?" she asked, her voice light. Ethan didn't look up from his book, but his voice was soft. "Yeah, sure. You pick." "I'm good with anything." Lena nodded, but something lingered in her chest. He was always so willing to go along with whatever she wanted, but it felt like he was slipping further away. She watched him for a moment, the quiet that surrounded him almost tangible. "You know, I miss us being social sometimes," Lena added, her voice quieter. "We haven't really hung out with anyone in a while." Ethan paused, lowering his book just enough to meet her eyes. "You're good with that though, right? I mean, we've got each other. Isn't that enough?" Lena smiled, though her thoughts were conflicted. She loved Ethan deeply. He was her rock. But part of her longed for more than just the quiet, for more than the two of them in their little bubble. She wanted to share their world with others. "I know," she said, her voice softer. "But I think it's important. It'd be nice for you to meet my friends. Get to know the people who are a big part of my life." Ethan's gaze softened, but she could see the hesitation in his eyes. It wasn't that he didn't want to try, but he wasn't like her. He didn't crave the social buzz, the noise. "Okay," he said quietly after a pause. "For you." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Lena felt a mix of relief and unease. She was hoping tonight would be different. Maybe she was wrong, but she wanted to bridge the gap between their worlds. When they arrived at Maya's apartment, the energy was immediately overwhelming. Lena's friends filled the space, chatting, laughing, their voices rising above the music in the background. It was everything Lena had hoped for, warm, familiar, full of life. But Ethan? He was a quiet figure in the corner, his face buried in the pages of his book. Lena felt the pull to him, constantly glancing over, but she didn't want to draw attention to his distance. She stayed in the flow of conversation, trying to balance both worlds, but her mind kept drifting back to him. Maya, Zoe, and Jill gathered around her at one point, and their conversation shifted to Ethan. "So Lena," Maya said, teasing but with an edge of concern, "how's the quiet guy doing? Doesn't seem like he's big on the whole party scene." Lena shifted uncomfortably, not sure how to respond. "Oh, he's fine. Just taking it easy. You know how he is. He's not big on big crowds." Jill chimed in, laughing a little too loudly. "A little too quiet, maybe? Do you ever feel like you're trapped by his introversion?" Lena stiffened, trying to mask her discomfort with a quick laugh. "He's just a private person. But we're good. Really." The comments, though light-hearted, made something inside Lena stir. She looked at Ethan again. He wasn't part of the conversation, nor did he seem interested in joining. He was retreating further into his book, into himself. The evening wore on, and Lena could feel the subtle tension building. She wanted to be part of both worlds, but it felt like the more she tried to integrate them, the more they pulled apart. When the party was over and they headed home, the silence in the car felt different. Lena's thoughts were racing, and she couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted between them. She glanced over at Ethan, his face unreadable. "I hope it wasn't too much," she said, trying to gauge his feelings. Ethan gave a small shrug, looking out the window. "It's fine. I'm just not really made for those kinds of things." Lena nodded, but deep down she couldn't help but wonder. Was this the start of something bigger? Had she made a mistake? The night ended quietly, but the question lingered in her mind. What happens when you let your friends into your relationship? As they walked back into their apartment, Lena felt the weight of her own doubts. She had wanted this to be a bridge, a way to bring Ethan into her world. But instead it felt like a gap had formed, one that neither of them knew how to cross. "I hope this flows better for a smoother delivery." The next few days felt different. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between her and Ethan. She went through her routine, but the weight of the party still lingered. Ethan had withdrawn even further into himself, retreating back to his quiet space in their apartment. His books, his silence, his distance. Lena started to question whether it was her fault. She couldn't stop thinking about her friends' comments. Maya's teasing about Ethan being too quiet, Jill's joke about her feeling trapped. They didn't understand him, didn't understand what it was like to be with someone who preferred silence over small talk. But those comments, meant to be light, now felt like they were chipping away at the foundation she'd built with Ethan. Lena had a message waiting for her when she got to work. It was from Maya again, inviting her out for dinner. Maya, text. We're all getting together tonight. Come on, Lena. It's been too long. Bring Ethan too if he's up for it. Lena stared at the screen for a moment, the guilt creeping in. She hadn't mentioned Ethan's discomfort with social gatherings to Maya. She hadn't mentioned how much he hated the loud parties, the way he would retreat into his own space when surrounded by people. Lena had always protected him from these moments, shielding him from the expectations of her friends, but now it felt like she was the one hiding something. Was she keeping too much from them? Was she lying by omission? She looked over at Ethan, who was sitting at the kitchen table, already flipping through his book as he usually did in the mornings. His world was so small, so simple. He didn't care for the noise, the chaos. But Lena wasn't sure anymore if that was enough for her. Hey, Lena said softly, closing her laptop. Maya's invited us out tonight. She wants to see both of us. Ethan didn't look up. His fingers ran along the edge of his book, absent-mindedly tracing the cover. I don't know, he said quietly. I'm not sure I'm up for it. Lena's chest tightened. It's just dinner, Ethan. You don't have to talk to everyone. I just want to spend time with you, with my friends. Ethan finally looked up, his expression unreadable. There was something in his eyes, something she hadn't seen in a while. It wasn't anger or frustration, but a quiet sadness, as though the weight of their worlds colliding was starting to break him down. Sometimes I don't know if I can be the guy you need me to be, he said softly, looking away. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how to respond. She hadn't realized how deeply the situation had affected him. I don't need you to be anyone but yourself, Ethan, she whispered, walking over to him. But I also need you to meet me halfway. I can't be in two places at once. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She wanted to make him understand, wanted to bridge the gap between their worlds, but she felt so lost in the middle. That evening, the dinner with Maya, Zoe, and Jill was everything Lena had feared. Ethan barely spoke, retreating further into himself. He was polite but distant. Lena tried to engage him in conversation, but it was like he was in another world. Maya and Jill didn't mean to make it worse, but every comment, every small jab about how quiet Ethan was, seemed to push him further away. At one point, Maya turned to Lena, her voice too casual, too light. So, Lena, do you ever wish he was, I don't know, more social? More like you? The question cut through Lena like a knife. She forced a smile, but it was tight, strained. I don't need him to be like me, Lena replied, her voice edged with defensiveness. He's just him. And that's enough for me. But even as she said it, doubts crept in. Was it enough for her? She had always been the center of attention, the life of the party. Was this partnership with Ethan truly enough for her? Later that night, as they walked home, the air between them was thick with tension. Ethan was still distant, his silence a wall between them. Lena, exhausted from the emotional strain of the evening, tried to break the quiet. Do you think they're right? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his eyes meeting hers. What do you mean? About us, she said, her words coming out in a rush. About you. Do you think you're too quiet? Too different for me? Ethan's face softened, but the hurt in his eyes was impossible to ignore. No, he said, shaking his head slowly. But I don't think I'm what you need either. Lena's heart pounded. She had never felt so conflicted in her life. She loved Ethan. But tonight, after everything, she felt so far away from him, like they were two strangers living in the same space. I never wanted to change you, Ethan, she said quietly. But I feel like you're slipping away. I'm losing you and I don't know how to fix it. Ethan looked down, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to fix it either, Lena. They stood there in the quiet of the night, both unsure of what came next. Both lost in their own thoughts, unsure if the bridge between their two worlds could ever be crossed. As Lena lay in bed that night, she stared up at the ceiling, her mind racing. Had she done something wrong? Had she made a mistake by trying to merge her two worlds, her friends and Ethan? She thought of her friends, their laughter, their ease around each other. She thought of Ethan, his quiet strength, his deep, unspoken love. The two seemed so far apart now. But she couldn't help but wonder, was it really her fault? Or was it simply that some people, no matter how much you loved them, could never fit into your world the way you wanted them to? As she drifted off to sleep, the question lingered in her mind. What happens when you let your friends into your relationship? Was it possible to keep the delicate balance of love and privacy intact? Or had she opened a door that could never be closed again? The days following the dinner were filled with an uncomfortable silence. Ethan seemed to pull back further into himself, while Lena was left grappling with the dissonance between her relationship with him and the expectations of her friends. It wasn't the silence that bothered her most, though. It was the growing divide between the two of them, one that felt like it was becoming harder to ignore. Lena found herself lying awake in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling as thoughts swirled in her mind. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had been keeping things from her friends. Small things at first: how different Ethan was from her social world, how he needed more time alone than most people. But now, she wondered if her silence about those differences was slowly pushing them apart. One evening, Lena couldn't take it anymore. She needed answers even if they were difficult to hear. After a quiet dinner together, when the apartment was filled with nothing but the sound of a ticking clock and distant traffic, Lena spoke up. "Ethan," she said, her voice tentative as if testing the waters. "I need to know something." Ethan, who had been staring down at his phone, glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. He set his phone down on the table, meeting her eyes. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Lena hesitated, her heart pounding. "Do you think you're enough for me? For us?" Ethan's brows furrowed slightly as if the question had caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to speak but paused. His gaze shifted to the window, avoiding hers. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice thick with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can be what you need." Lena felt a sharp pain in her chest. His words hit her harder than she had expected, but at the same time, they were the truth she had been too scared to ask for. She took a deep breath, willing herself to remain calm. "I don't want you to be someone else, Ethan," she said softly. "I just need you to meet me halfway. I need you to try even when it's hard." Ethan looked down, running his fingers through his hair in frustration. "I try, Lena. But sometimes it feels like I'm not enough for you. I see the way you look at your friends, how easily they fit into your life. And then there's me always standing off to the side. You don't deserve to feel like you have to choose between me and them." Lena stood up and walked over to him, standing by his side, her heart aching for him. She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. "You don't have to compete with them," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "But I can't keep hiding who you are from them either. I love you, Ethan. And I want them to see you the way I do." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and something deeper, something that might have been fear or maybe longing. He opened his mouth as though to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he reached up, his hand finding hers. "I'm scared, Lena," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Scared that I'll never be enough for you. Scared that I'll keep losing you to this world that's so different from mine." Lena's chest tightened. She hadn't realized how deeply he had been struggling with this, how the divide between their worlds had started to chip away at him. She squeezed his hand gently. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "But we have to find a way to make this work. We can't keep pretending that everything's fine when we're both holding back." There was a long silence between them. Ethan didn't pull away, but Lena could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging in the air. She was asking him to change, to meet her halfway, and he was asking for her to meet him in his quiet world, where he didn't have to be someone else to fit in. For a moment, Lena thought about the difficulty of that compromise. It wouldn't be easy, but then again, love had never been about choosing the easy path. It was about figuring out how to keep going, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. The next day, Lena sat in her favorite cafe, the clink of coffee cups and the murmur of voices blending into the background as she sat with Maya. She hadn't planned to talk about Ethan, not at first, but the tension between her and her friends had been building ever since the dinner. Maya was the first to speak, her eyes narrowing in concern. "So, how's everything going with Ethan? I know you're trying to make things work, but I get the feeling that something's off." Lena set her cup down slowly, unsure of how to approach the conversation. She had always been the one to listen to her friends' problems, to offer advice. But now she wasn't sure how to handle her own. "It's complicated," Lena said after a long pause. "I've been thinking about everything, about what you said the other night, about whether I need more from Ethan. And the truth is, I don't need him to be like me. But I do need him to try. I need him to be present, even if it's uncomfortable for him." Maya's expression softened. "I get it," she said quietly. "You love him, Lena. But you've got to be honest with yourself too. You can't keep pretending that everything's fine if it's not. And he's got to meet you halfway too." Lena nodded, the weight of her friend's words settling over her like a cloud. She had been afraid of this moment, afraid that her own insecurities, her doubts about the relationship, might surface. But she was starting to realize that being honest with herself was the only way forward. That night, when she came home, Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, writing something in his notebook. The quietness between them felt different now. There was a sense of openness, of raw honesty that had been missing before. Lena walked over and sat beside him, her heart racing as she searched for the right words. "I've been thinking," she started slowly, "about us. About what we both need. And I think I've been holding back, keeping parts of my life from my friends, from you, because I was scared. But I can't do that anymore." Ethan put his pen down, looking at her. "What do you mean?" Lena took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I want us to be real with each other, Ethan. I want my friends to know you, the real you. I don't want to hide you anymore. But I also want you to know that I don't need you to change. I just need you to try." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time in days, there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I'll try," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need you to understand me too. I need you to know that I won't always fit into the world you've built, but I'm willing to make it work." Lena smiled, her heart swelling with relief. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And that, she realized, was all she had ever wanted. The days following their heart-to-heart were filled with a quiet sort of tension, but also a sense of cautious optimism. Lena had never been more aware of the delicate balance she and Ethan were trying to maintain. Every small gesture, every moment of silence between them, now felt like a test. Would they be able to make it through this? Or was the divide between their worlds simply too wide to bridge? One evening, a week after their conversation, Lena found herself sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. Ethan was in the living room, reading as usual, but his presence was different. The air between them was lighter, more comfortable, like they had finally exhaled after holding their breath for too long. Lena smiled at the thought of it. She had realized that, despite everything, there was still so much love between them. The world outside might have expected more, but they had found their own version of love, quiet, steady, and full of understanding. Her phone buzzed, and it was a message from Maya again. "Maya, so, are you bringing him this weekend? The whole crew is getting together. I think it's time we all have a serious conversation about this quiet guy of yours. We need to get to know him better, Lena." Lena paused for a moment, staring at the message. It wasn't a malicious comment, but the weight of it still made her uneasy. She hadn't shared many details with Maya about the deeper issues between her and Ethan. She had simply told her that things were going well, but not how she and Ethan had struggled to find a balance. She typed back slowly. "Lena, I think he's up for it this time. He's been trying and I want to give him the chance. But I need you to understand that he's not like you guys. It's not always going to be easy for him." She stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. It was the first time she had really put those words out there, her plea for her friends to understand Ethan's differences, to give him the space he needed to be himself. When the weekend arrived, Lena and Ethan were preparing for the dinner at Maya's house. It had been a while since Ethan had interacted with her friends, and Lena knew the evening might be challenging for him. But she felt hopeful. She had been honest with Maya, and she needed to see how Ethan would handle the situation now that they had both acknowledged their differences. Maya's house, night. The house was filled with laughter and chatter as Lena and Ethan walked through the door. Maya greeted them at the entrance with a bright smile. "Lena." And Ethan right on time. Maya's voice was warm, but there was a certain undercurrent of excitement in her tone, as if she couldn't wait to get Ethan involved in their conversations. Ethan offered a small smile but didn't immediately engage. He was standing back, his body language slightly stiff. Lena noticed and gently squeezed his hand. "I told them we'd be here," she whispered to him. "Just be yourself. You don't have to be anyone else." Ethan nodded, though his hesitation was still palpable. He followed Lena into the living room, where Zoe and Jill were already sitting, sipping wine and chatting. Their faces lit up when they saw Lena and Ethan. "Lena." "Ethan." Jill greeted them enthusiastically, though she didn't seem to notice the discomfort Ethan carried with him. "It's so great to finally have you both here. Let's get a drink." Lena smiled politely, but she could sense the tension building. Ethan, in contrast, seemed to withdraw even more. He took a seat at the far end of the room next to a bookshelf and pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll through it. It was his escape, his way of dealing with the noise around him. Lena stayed with her friends for a few minutes, trying to navigate between the conversations, but her eyes kept drifting to Ethan. She could see the subtle way he pulled further into his shell every time one of Maya's friends approached him. There was no judgment in their eyes, only curiosity. But it wasn't enough to make him feel comfortable. After a while, Maya slid next to Lena, her tone turning more serious. "Lena," Maya said quietly, "I get that he's shy, but he's really not even trying, is he? I mean, this is your life, and it feels like you're carrying all the weight of it on your shoulders." Lena's heart sank. She could hear the unspoken judgment in Maya's words. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore, it was about her choices, her life. She had to explain. "You're right," Lena began, her voice low. "He's not like you guys. He's quiet and sometimes he needs time to adjust. But that doesn't mean he doesn't want to be here or that he doesn't care. It's just different for him." Maya's face softened, but there was still a hint of skepticism. "But it's hard for you too, right? I mean, he's not really meeting you halfway, Lena." Lena took a deep breath. She had been dreading this conversation, but it had to happen. "I know. But we're working on it. I've been pushing him, trying to make him fit into my world, but it's not about that. It's about understanding each other. It's about compromise." Later that evening, as the group gathered around the dinner table, Lena's heart continued to ache as she watched Ethan retreat further into his corner. Her friends were making an effort to include him, but it felt like a surface-level effort, nothing that reached the core of who he was. The noise, the conversations, the laughter, none of it seemed to land. Ethan was still miles away. Lena excused herself and stood up, walking over to him. She sat beside him, close enough to feel his presence but distant enough to give him space. For a moment they both sat in silence. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes meeting hers. There was no anger, no frustration, just tiredness. "I know you're trying, Lena. I know you want me to be part of this world. But sometimes it's too much for me. I don't know how to make it better." Lena's heart clenched. She didn't have all the answers. But in that moment she knew one thing for sure. She loved him, and that was enough. "You don't have to be perfect," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. "You just have to be you. And that's enough for me." As the evening continued, Lena made sure to check in with Ethan regularly, offering him the space he needed but also subtly including him in the conversations when she could. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect. But there was something about it that felt right. They didn't need to fit into each other's worlds entirely. They just needed to meet somewhere in the middle. That was the compromise they had agreed upon, slowly but surely. By the time they left Maya's house, the atmosphere between them had shifted. It wasn't perfect, nothing in life ever is. But it was a start. A new beginning. The days after the dinner at Maya's were quieter. It wasn't that things were perfect, far from it, but there was an unspoken understanding between Lena and Ethan that hadn't been there before. A fragile truce, but one that felt like it might hold. They were trying. Both of them. And that was enough for now. Lena found herself thinking more about what Maya had said, the way she had gently nudged her to question if she and Ethan were really meeting each other halfway. She couldn't stop the thoughts from swirling around in her mind. Was it fair to expect Ethan to change so much for her world? Was it fair to ask him to leave behind the quiet, solitary world that brought him peace? But then there were moments, small and fleeting, that made her realize just how much they meant to each other. Like that morning when Ethan had made her coffee just the way she liked it without her asking. Or when, after a long day at work, he'd quietly opened the door to their apartment, setting aside his book for a moment just to hold her for a few seconds. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy. But it was real. One evening, Lena decided it was time to take a step forward. Ethan had been distant lately, more withdrawn than usual. Lena wasn't sure if it was the stress of balancing their worlds or if something else was weighing on him, but she couldn't stand the silence any longer. She needed to understand where they stood, to make sure they weren't both just pretending everything was fine. She found him in their living room, sitting in his usual chair, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating his face as he flipped through the pages of his book. The sight was comforting in its familiarity, but tonight, it made Lena feel more uncertain than ever. She walked over to him, her voice soft but steady. "Ethan," she began, sitting on the armrest of his chair, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "We need to talk." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes dark and tired. "About what?" Lena took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation she'd been avoiding. "About us. About where we're going from here." He shifted slightly, setting his book aside and leaning back in his chair. "What do you mean?" Lena swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. "I know things haven't been easy. And I know we've both been trying, but I need to know if we're really on the same page. Are we? Or am I just trying to fit you into a world that doesn't feel right for you?" Ethan's eyes softened, and for the first time in days he didn't look away. He met her gaze with an intensity that made her heart race. "I don't know," he said quietly, almost too quietly. "I don't know if I can ever fit into your world the way you want me to. But I do know that I don't want to lose you. And I'm trying, Lena. I really am." Lena felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of relief and guilt. She had wanted so badly to believe that everything would work out, but now, standing here, she wasn't so sure. "I don't need you to be someone else," she said, her voice shaky. "I just need you to be part of my life the way you are. But I also need you to try to meet me halfway like we talked about. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when we're both holding back." Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck as he thought. "I know," he whispered. I don't want to hurt you. I don't know how to fit into the world you want me to be a part of. But I don't want to lose you either. I just don't want to feel like I'm always failing you." Lena's heart broke at his words. She reached for his hand, holding it gently in hers. "You're not failing me," she said softly. "We're both just trying to find a balance. And that's okay. I don't need you to change who you are, Ethan. I just need you to be willing to step outside your comfort zone sometimes. I need to know you'll meet me halfway even if it's hard." Ethan's fingers tightened around hers, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'll try, Lena. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I'll try. For you." A deep breath escaped Lena, and she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a grand, perfect moment of understanding. It wasn't a promise that everything would suddenly fall into place. But in that moment, they both realized something important. Love wasn't about perfection or fitting into each other's worlds completely. It was about showing up even when it was hard. Even when it meant stepping outside of what felt comfortable. The next few weeks were still filled with ups and downs, but there was a new sense of effort between them. Ethan made more of an effort to attend social gatherings, though he often retreated into the background, observing rather than participating. Lena, in turn, respected his need for space, but she made sure he felt included in the moments that mattered. One weekend, they were sitting in the park together watching the sunset. The air was cool, and the golden light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt right, when the noise of the world faded away, leaving only the two of them. Lena leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "I think we're getting there." Ethan didn't reply immediately, but his arm tightened around her, pulling her closer. "I hope so," he said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "I don't want to be the reason you're unhappy, Lena. I just want to be enough for you." Lena smiled, looking up at him. "You are. You always have been." For the first time in a long while, Lena felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but they were willing to walk it together, one step at a time. As the weeks passed, the rhythm between Lena and Ethan started to shift in subtle, yet meaningful ways. Their conversations became deeper, their silences more comfortable. They began to understand the unspoken language between them, the small gestures that showed love and care in ways that words often couldn't capture. But even though things were improving, Lena couldn't escape the feeling that something was still unresolved. There were moments when she caught herself holding back, unsure whether to push Ethan further into her world or give him more space. Every time they seemed to be on the same page, the pages of their lives seemed to shift again, each one turning more slowly than the last. One afternoon, Lena came home after a long day at work, the weight of the world still pressing down on her shoulders. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and as she stepped into the apartment, she immediately felt the familiar, comforting presence of Ethan. He was sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling in his notebook, the soft sound of the pen on paper the only noise in the room. His presence was grounding, but it also reminded her of the distance that sometimes lingered between them, no matter how much they tried to bridge it. Lena dropped her bag on the couch and went to the kitchen, where Ethan looked up from his writing, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Hey," she greeted, trying to shake off the day. "How was your day?" Ethan closed his notebook, his eyes focused on her. "It was fine. Just writing mostly." She could see the tiredness in his eyes, the same kind of exhaustion she felt. They both seemed to carry it around like a weight. His from his quiet world, hers from the endless demands of her career and social life. Lena let out a breath, leaning against the counter, her fingers tracing the edge of the granite. "I'm just tired," she admitted, her voice low. "I feel like I'm pulled in so many directions lately. Work, friends trying to keep us on track. I don't know how to balance it all anymore." Ethan stood up slowly and walked over to her, the warmth of his hand reaching out to hold hers. "I know," he said quietly. "It's hard for both of us. I feel it too." I wish I could be more. I don't know, more of a partner for you in the way you want me to be. But it's just not easy for me to fit into that world. Lena met his eyes, searching for the right words. It wasn't about him changing. It never had been. It was about the compromises they were both making, about finding ways to be together without losing themselves in the process. I don't want you to change, she said softly. I just want us to figure out how to make it work. I don't want to keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. We've been pretending, haven't we? Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing over her skin as he studied her with a mixture of concern and love. Maybe we have, he said slowly. But I'm willing to keep trying, Lena. Even if it means taking small steps. I'm not perfect, but I don't want to lose you. Lena's heart squeezed at his words, at the vulnerability she saw in his eyes. He was scared. She knew that. But so was she. They had both been dancing around the real issue for so long, fearing that the divide between their worlds was too big to close. But she wasn't ready to give up on them. Not yet. She kissed him softly, a quiet promise in that brief, tender moment. We won't lose each other, she whispered, pulling away just enough to meet his eyes. We'll figure this out. Together. The next few days were filled with a new sense of purpose. Lena and Ethan talked more openly, sharing their frustrations and fears, while also acknowledging the things they loved about each other. They both knew it wasn't going to be easy, but the foundation of their relationship felt more solid than it ever had before. One evening, Lena found herself at another dinner with her friends, Maya, Zoe, and Jill. She had hesitated at first, unsure if Ethan was ready for another round of socializing, but this time felt different. She had been honest with her friends about Ethan, about his need for space, and they were trying to understand. Ethan, though still quiet, was more willing to engage. He didn't participate as much as the others, but he didn't retreat either. Lena could feel the shift in the air, the way her friends were trying to include him, the way she was no longer caught between two worlds. Maya leaned toward Lena, her voice soft but probing. So, how's it really going with Ethan? She asked, her gaze flickering briefly toward him before landing back on Lena. You seem different lately. Like more at peace. Lena smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her. It's been tough, but I think we're getting there. We're learning how to meet in the middle. It's not always perfect, but we're trying. Maya's expression softened, her eyes filling with understanding. I'm glad to hear that. I think I was too quick to judge him, to judge you too. Sometimes, it's easy to forget that not all relationships look the same. But it's clear you really care about each other. Lena nodded, grateful for Maya's honesty. Yeah, we do. And I'm realizing that's enough. It's all we need, really. Later that evening, as Lena and Ethan walked back to their apartment, the weight of the day seemed lighter. They were both quiet, but it was a comfortable kind of quiet. The city around them buzzed, but it felt distant, as if it couldn't touch the little bubble they had created together. When they got inside, Ethan turned to her, a faint smile on his lips. Thanks for pushing me to be there tonight, he said. I don't always know how to handle those situations, but I'm trying. I don't want to let my world make you feel like you have to choose between us. Lena wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face into his chest. I know you're trying. And that's all I need. I'll always try too. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other. The quiet moments, the ones where they didn't need to speak, where their connection was enough. Those were the moments Lena knew they were going to be okay. Not perfect, but real. And that, she realized, was all they needed. A few months had passed since that night. Lena and Ethan had settled into a new routine, one that felt more balanced, though not without its challenges. They had learned to navigate each other's worlds with compromises on both sides. Lena made more space for Ethan's quiet, introspective nature, while Ethan pushed himself to engage with her friends and participate in social situations, even when they were outside his comfort zone. But the road hadn't been without bumps. It never was. Even as they found a rhythm, there were moments when old insecurities resurfaced, when their differences felt too large to bridge. Yet, each time that happened, they found themselves returning to the foundation they had built: honesty, communication, and the willingness to try. One evening, Lena sat on the couch, her laptop open in front of her, the soft light of the desk lamp illuminating the room. She was buried in work, her fingers flying over the keyboard, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. But as the minutes passed, she began to feel a presence beside her. Ethan had walked in quietly, as he always did. He was holding a book in his hand, his movements careful, almost hesitant. He paused when he saw her immersed in her work. Need a break? He asked, his voice gentle as he looked down at her with a faint smile. Lena glanced up at him, surprised. Maybe, she said, though she didn't quite feel ready to step away from her work just yet. She loved what she did, her job brought her fulfillment, but lately she had felt the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. The balance between work, her friends, and her relationship with Ethan felt like a juggling act she wasn't sure she was handling well. Ethan sat down next to her on the couch, placing the book in his lap. I was thinking we could go for a walk later. Just around the neighborhood. Get some fresh air. Lena hesitated for a moment. She wasn't sure if she could afford the time. There was always something to do, always something that needed her attention. But when she looked at Ethan, sitting quietly beside her, she realized that this moment, this small request for time together, meant more than any deadline or work task. Yeah, she said softly. That sounds nice. Ethan smiled, and for a moment they simply sat in silence. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one of quiet understanding. In the past, this stillness might have felt like a void, but now it felt like peace. Later that evening, they walked side by side through the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The air was cool, the world around them quiet as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over everything. They didn't need to speak. The act of being together, sharing this small piece of time, felt like enough. After a few minutes, Ethan spoke up, his voice thoughtful. I've been thinking a lot lately. Lena turned her head toward him, curious. About what? About us, he said quietly. About how far we've come. How much we've learned about each other and how much we've changed. I know it's been hard at times, but I don't know. I feel like we're finally in a place where we're both really here. You know. Lena's heart warmed at his words. It hadn't been easy. Nothing about their journey had been. But they had made it through together. I know, she said softly. I felt that too. We've come a long way, haven't we? Ethan nodded. Yeah. And I want to keep going. I want to keep trying even when it gets tough. Even when I don't know if I'm enough. Lena stopped walking for a moment, turning to face him. The streetlight illuminated her face and she smiled at him, her heart full. You are enough, Ethan. You always have been. Ethan's eyes softened, a gentle smile curling at his lips. I'm glad you think that. They stood there for a few seconds, the world around them still but full of meaning. Lena had learned so much from their journey together, not just about love but about patience, understanding, and the importance of compromise. The next week, Lena had to travel for work. It was a big presentation and she'd been preparing for weeks. As she packed her suitcase, the tension in her shoulders grew. She hated being away from Ethan even for a short time. Their relationship had been fragile in the beginning, and she didn't want to risk losing the closeness they had found. When Ethan came into the room, she was folding a shirt, her brow furrowed in concentration. Hey, he said gently. You're all packed. Lena nodded, not meeting his gaze. Yeah, just finishing up. Ethan walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'll miss you, he said quietly. Lena's heart ached at the tenderness in his voice. She looked up at him, her chest tightening. I'll miss you too, she admitted. I'm not sure how I'll handle being away from you. It feels strange, like a part of me is missing when I'm not here. Ethan smiled softly, his thumb gently brushing her arm. We'll be fine, he said, his voice steady. You just focus on your work and we'll pick up where we left off when you get back. You know I'll be here. Lena nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. He was always there even when things were hard. Even when the distance between their worlds felt impossible to overcome. As she left, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. There was something about knowing Ethan was still there, still fighting for their love, that gave her the strength to face whatever came her way. A few days later, Lena returned home after a successful trip. She walked through the door of their apartment, the familiar scent of Ethan's cologne and the warmth of their home surrounding her. She was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came with knowing she had accomplished something important, and that Ethan would be there to share it with her. As she set her suitcase down, Ethan emerged from the living room, a smile on his face. He had a book in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. Welcome home, he said softly. Lena smiled, her heart lifting at the sight of him. It's good to be back. She walked toward him and without thinking she wrapped her arms around him. I missed you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan held her close, resting his chin on top of her head. I missed you too, more than you know. Lena pulled back slightly to look at him, a small laugh escaping her lips. You're really something, you know that? Ethan raised an eyebrow, looking at her with mild amusement. What do you mean? Lena smiled softly, her hand gently brushing against his cheek. You've been the one constant in my life. No matter how messy things get, you're always here, always trying. And that's more than enough for me. Ethan's eyes softened and he reached up to kiss her forehead. That's all I've ever wanted to be. Enough for you. And in that moment, as Lena looked up at him, she knew that no matter how many obstacles they would face, no matter how many times their worlds collided, they had found something worth fighting for. They had found each other. And that was enough.